Okay. Hope you had a good little break. Let's get back and get busy. So we've heard here the warnings of the king of Assyria. We have seen in chapters past prophecies against Egypt, against Babylon here in chapter 21. It goes on against Duma and Arabia, and then in chapter 22 against Jerusalem, against Tyre. And we say, we weary of this. We say, why? What was it? Well, in every case, including Israel's, the burden that they carried was one of, they were an advanced civilization, let's just say that, but their religion was abominable. They worshiped Baal and the Ashtoreth or Ishtar, Asherah, the deities that Jezebel brought into Israel. Against Tyre, the same thing we can read in Ezekiel chapter 28. I'm not going to go there, but it was directed against Tyre. He makes clear the reason for the wrath of God lays primarily in their idolatrous pride. Okay? Idolatrous pride. What did we say in the beginning of our message tonight? That there is a move for people to move away from faith. Forget God. You're God. You feel that you're God. That's idolatrous pride right there. Because no one takes pride in an idol or a statue. Idolatrous pride is in you. We become our own idols. Just like I said, I was reading things even online the past few days. You freed me from the dangers of faith and this and that, and I feel free, and I know that I am God within me. And I'm saying, man, you crazy. But people get carried away. They lose their way. In the beginning of tonight's message, we said in Isaiah that there was a lion. A reference to Satan was a lion roaming about, seeking whom he can devour. All of the language, the symbolism, everything. Remember, when the prophet sees, he's in spirit, he's seeing everything happening at once because God is spirit and everything is in the present. Everything that ever happened, everything that is ever going to happen is in that dimension with God. And to get a glimpse of it, all right, is daunting in every sense of the word. Now, one of these prophets didn't have issues, all right? Remember what happened to Elijah? Beaten up, bloody, thought he was the only one. God took him out of ministry, said, take it easy. You did enough for now, all right? Jezebel tried to kill him. Ahab tried to kill him. I mean, the guy, enough was enough. But they all have things about them. None of these people are perfect. They have a perfect faith and belief in God. But they're still human and imperfect, all right? But this Jezebel thing takes us right back to the concept of the harlot. And that's what we really are talking about. It was Jezebel who brought the perverse and idolatrous religions into Israel, infecting them, such that God has to speak out against them. And it's not through. Just because they went through their time of tribulation for all those years, 1967 to be exact, they get a whooping in Revelation too, all right? They got a problem. But I want to talk about this whole concept of this harlot. Wherever I read, people say, it's a woman who is painted up and streetwalker and takes money for prostituting herself and all this other stuff. And I told you, time and time again, the word harlot, all right, means counterfeit bride. And that counterfeit bride, we reconciled in Revelation in our study what that counterfeit bride was. So you say, well, counterfeit bride, what does that really mean? Well, we know what the true bride is, right? You know, she's in white. She walks down the aisle. The bride is pure, being presented to the bridegroom by the bride's father. And we do that in a natural sense in the physical. And the physical serves as an analogy to the bride, the bridegroom. We know who that is, the Messiah, spoken of through Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon, the love affair between the bridegroom and the bride. But the bride is to be pure. And what does that mean? It means what we said in Revelation teaching, like even 144,000. Those who are virgins, which means their faith is what they have. They've not gone out beyond their faith, all right? They don't worship idolatrous false gods. They remain pure, virgin-like in their faith. And we read a moment ago where it said to pull out that shield. Remember the anointed shield, the Messiah, the shield of faith. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because when the watchers are in a watchtower, what do you think they're watching for? The enemy. He claims a lion looking to whom he can devour. We can refer to countries and enemies the same way. They're watching from the watchtower because war is on the way. And we saw that, and we see it throughout pretty much all of what we've read, all through in Revelation. Now, I'll tell you something. Because, well, you know what? I'm going to go through it first, and then we're going to give you an example, a real life example. So, we see all this turmoil in the world. We see the attack on Christians. We see little children getting their heads cut off in the Middle East. We see attacks on Israel. We see a mounting threat with hypersonic missiles, etc. To live in Israel is to be on constant alert because the enemy's there. And when we talk about the harlot, I could tell you, and we've said this in the Revelation series, that most commentators, all right, believe that the Roman Church, this Catholic Church, is the harlot. Well, you didn't hear me say that. I said to you that it was a rogue, apostate religion or faith that had half-truths in some areas and full truth, and a lot of nonsense in others, such that it's a mixed-up jumble. And most theologians, etc., writers, people that dedicate themselves, I guess, to writing about prophecy, all believe that this harlot is Rome. And you know what? I got to tell you that the overall church's behavior over the past half century that we recognize has been pretty bad, all right? Pretty bad. But, like the virgins, the 10 virgins with the vials of oil, some of them had a full vial and the others had none. Maybe they had half. So such is this idea. So I've got to go ahead and debunk that whole concept because it's still leading people in bad places and more persecution to come. And the ugly serpent that we fight, all right, always is turning his head to see where, and the lion seeking whom he can devour. But I want to take you on a little journey, all right? Because when we look at the whole issue of the Roman Church being Mystery Babylon, harlot, it seems like it makes sense. And the number one reason is because in Revelation it says that it is a city that sits on 7 mountains, all right? However, We often call that hills. We say sitting on 7 hills. Now I can tell you that in the world today there are 17 cities that sit in the midst of hills or mountains. We're only interested in 3 here: Rome, Jerusalem, and here you go, surprise, Mecca. Mecca. Mecca is the holy place of Islam. Jerusalem is the holy place of Judaism, Judah, Benjamin, and believers. Rome houses the largest church, or one of the large 2, Rome and Islam, Catholicism and Islam, 2 largest churches, if you will, both believing that they're the one true one, all right? One willing to kill the other. So that Orthodox Christian view and teaching has pointed to Rome as the harlot of Revelation. And by much seemingly apparent evidence, they can justify that teaching as false as it is. Why? Yeah, it's false. Why? Because they don't know the alternative. Well, we want to go the extra mile here, and I've done this study many years ago. Hills and mountains, just like everything else, have names. And names have meanings. So the mountains. In Revelation 17, it speaks of such a city, and in the English it calls them hills. Hills. However, the word for hills is oros, or mountains, not buros, hills. So when we read in Revelation about Rome, the mistranslation of the word hills for mountains brings us to a wrong conclusion, and that's just at the base level. Mecca, however, sits on 7 mountains. Jerusalem sits on in between 7 hills. So, back to the names. As I said, hills and mountains typically have names, and these 3 cities are no exception. So I will list the names of each in order and then tell you what they mean in Hebrew. This is a compelling story, but we have to get it out. And yet another hard example. You know, evidence. I'm going to give you evidence. But in today's day and age, and I remember reading Thomas Sowell, our greatest economist next to Milton Friedman, and he says, basically, in speaking about facts and fallacies about economics, he brings it to clarity, and it's so weird that his words were prescient. They were spoken 15, 18 years ago, but they're so real today. He says that repetition has been accepted in place of evidence. In other words, if you keep rattling the same tune, the same agenda, the same song, irrespective of anything, that people start to hear it and believe it, even in the face of hard evidence. Go figure. Well, I'm going to give you hard evidence to clear up this mystery, such that, as bad as that church can be, it's not the harlot of Revelation. We're going to see very quickly why. It's definitive proof that only the finger of God could possibly have written this word and understood it with the constant meaning, message of the word being from the beginning, from the breath of the Creator, our God, from the very beginning. Now, what I'm going to read to you, these names, note that oftentimes the meanings can or sometimes must be read either top to bottom or bottom to top. Most of them, it's the same no matter what. The message has to be consistent with the totality of God's Word. The story remains persistently constant throughout all of Scripture. So here we go. The names of the mountain, the hills rather, with which in Rome lies, or Aventine or Aventinus, Calian or Calius, Capitoline or Capitolinus, Esquiline, Palestine, Palentinus, Quirtal, or Quirinalis, Viminal, or Venimulus. Okay? And they all have these meanings. Aventine is arrival. Caelius is the angel of the sky, or celestial. Capitolinus is the temple of Jupiter. Esquiline means cult. Palentinus, royal privilege, Palestine. Quirinalis, powerful man of peace. And Viminal, or Viminalis, who bends to the goddess. Okay, bends to the goddess. All right. Now, we'll look at Jerusalem. We'll see what it sits in the midst of. Scopus, these are the mountains, which means lookout or the watcher. Olivet, which is the Mount of Olives. Ophel, the swelling ground. Zion is a parched place, but a new place. All right. And Mashkit, which means corruption, immorality, and depravity. Antonia means priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. And now we come to our third city, Mecca. Seba, God is the cause. Safa, she knows. Marwa, Isaac's sacrifice. Milha, covenant of the circumcision. Ma'aya, ascent or climbing to the exalted. Hulaya, dream. And Guslan, goodbye. All right. So, from bottom to top, I'm going to start with Mecca. Here's what those names mean when they're put together. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of the circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice. She knows God is the cause. And now, for Rome. The arrival in the sky of the celestial angels to the temple of the cult of Jupiter. Those with royal privilege. Listen, to the powerful man of peace who bends to the goddess. Speaking about the Pope, that office of the papal. Cult of Jupiter, having royal privilege. You ever see all the gold that surrounds that guy? The powerful man of peace, declaims himself as a man of peace, who bends to the goddess. You see that statue that they worship, that they call the Virgin Mary, they worship, and they put her before Jesus himself, saying that she's the mediator. You got to go through her and pray in her name to get to Jesus. Now that's Catholicism. Sorry, folks. There's a lot of good folks there that believe. They certainly know they believe the Lord is God. And they believe everything about that. But the misleading, the goddess, it's a woman. In this case, the statue that we see, people praying to this woman. Miriam was a young lady when her son was born. She wasn't that much older when he died. She was a young woman, 40s. She was a sinner like everybody else. Had to die. Had to accept her own son. All right? She wasn't to be worshipped. Now, let's look at Jerusalem and what those words mean. We're going to read these all once again together. The watcher sees from the Mount of Olives, who stands out above in the parched place, surrounded by immorality and depravity, surrounded by, but is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. All right, now I'm going to read them to you, top to bottom, then bottom to top, in full, all three together as one story. And I want you to listen very closely with these names of these hills and mountains around Rome, Jerusalem, and Mecca. Listen to the story that they tell. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of the circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice. He's saying, forget about being exalted in Judaism, right? And she knows that God is the cause. Who's she? She, the spirit of Jezebel. Ishtar, Asherah, the idolatrous religions. Same thing in the one that we just spoke about. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice. She knows God is the cause of this. All right? God is the cause of her downfall. That's what she's saying. The arrival in the sky of the celestial angels to the temple of the cult of Jupiter, one with royal privilege, to the powerful man of peace, who actually bends his knee to the goddess. Yes, the Pope does that. The Watcher. Remember, we spoke of the Watcher in the watchtower. Watching for what? The lion who comes to devour and the enemy who comes to conquer and besiege. The Watcher sees from the Mount of Olives that swells and stands out above in that parched place. Zion is called a parched place, dry land, which is surrounded by immorality and depravity. And we know that that's true, not only around them, but within. Remember I said Jerusalem gets its punishment too. Yet, but is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. So, the indictment, okay? The indictment is against the harlot. And the harlot is not Rome. He bends his knee to the harlot, to the virgin, to the woman, whoever. The goddess, which is what they're symbolic of. And that goddess is enmeshed in Ishtar, Asherah, Jezebel, all right? But she knows Saphia, or Safa, which is the second mountain. Remember, hills to mountains. Mountains. Safa is the mountain. The second one around Mecca. It says she knows that she's never going to get to that place of where the circumcision are. She's never going to get to that place. Jezebel will never, ever get to a place of equal standing with the apple of God's eye, which is Israel. We saw that when she was cast down by her own eunuchs as Jehu came to kill her after killing Ahab. She destroyed the land. She perverted it. She polluted it with her false religion, with her abortion and killing of little children and throwing them into the fires of Moloch. She did that, all right? And we know what her daughter Athaliah did, all right? Killed all of her own kids except Joash. And God winked and said, God has made himself a man, a precursor. That's what they were trying to do. That's Jezebel's job. All the way back to Esau. The only way that Esau can regain his inheritance is to destroy Jacob and his seed, not realizing that they're both the seed of Abraham because of his jealousy and his hatred for his brother, for he gave up his inheritance. And all the way through, Jezebel follows all the way through and tries to destroy the bloodline of the Messiah through King David. All right? It's an amazing story if you see it. Now I'm going to read it upside down, or right, from the bottom. Listen to this now, reading it from the perspective of Jerusalem. I read you earlier Mecca, Rome, Jerusalem. Now I'm going to read Jerusalem, Rome, Mecca. The arrival in the sky of the celestial angels to the temple of the cult of Jupiter with royal privilege to the powerful man of peace who bends to the goddess. Not is the goddess, bends. That's Rome. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of the circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice, and she knows that God is the cause of her downfall. But the watcher sees, and he watches from the Mount of Olives, which stand out above in the parched place of Zion, surrounded by immorality and depravity, but yet is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. That is Jerusalem, and that is the story. And that harlot comes and is the false counterfeit bride. Harlot means counterfeit bride, not the bride intended for the bridegroom, but a counterfeit one. Jezebel was a counterfeit. Athaliah, her daughter, was a counterfeit regnant queen, the only one who will ever lead in Israel that was not married. Was not married. This is tough stuff, but it's got to be brought out. It's got to be said. It's got to be spoken. We have to understand what these terms mean. What has happened here? And all the condemnations, the punishments being doled out, all these areas. And we come to find now, if you dig in and you see what's really being said in Revelation, we see that the counterfeit bride, Catholicism is not a counterfeit anything. It's an apostate religion. One who would take the place of the Messiah, the counterfeit. All right? All right. Islam is buried deeply in that religion. And that religion is buried deeply with Jezebel, because that's where Hagar, Ishmael, and the rest of them, Esau, all traveled to there. And it became Islam. Now, when I say a counterfeit bride, let me tell you what Muhammad himself did, the holy Muhammad of the Quran. All right? Here we go. He took for his wife a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old. Okay? And he consummated that marriage when she was 9. When she was 9. How do you do that? How do you take a 6-year-old child, consummate when she's 9? Do you realize that by the time she was 18, he was dead and her entire life was ruined? This is counterfeit. A 6-year-old, a 9-year-old are not fit to be a bride to anyone, and certainly not to be abused. But look at the contempt that religion has for children, Christian children in the world. They sit there and they cut their heads off. Harlot, counterfeit bride. But in the end, things happen. Ezekiel chapter 48, I want to close out tonight with this, where the gates of the city are mentioned. It says, and these are the goings out of the city on the north side, 4,500 measures, and then the gates of the city shall be after the names of the tribes of Israel. He's speaking about a time way out in the future. All right? The gates of the city shall be named after the names of the tribes of Israel. 3 gates north, 1 gate of Reuben, 1 gate of Judah, 1 gate of Levi. And at the east side, 4,503 gates, and 1 gate of Joseph, 1 gate of Benjamin, and 1 gate of Dan. And at the south side, 4,500 measures. A measure is about 22 feet. And 3 gates. 1 gate of Simeon, 1 gate of Issachar, 1 gate of Zebulun. And on the west side, 4,500 with their 3 gates. 1 gate of Gad, 1 gate of Asher, and 1 gate of Naphtali. Now, that's pretty cool. And it's consistent with what we read Revelation. But the real kicker here is this. Look at this. Jerusalem, over the years, originally was called Salem. It went from Salem to Jerusalem, the city of peace. Then it became Jerusalem, where God will provide himself a lamb in the city of peace. And now we move to the new Jerusalem. But Ezekiel doesn't call Jerusalem New Jerusalem. It is Jehovah Shammah. All right? Listen to what it says, the name of the city, the last verse in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 48, verse 35. Look what it says. It was round about 18,000 measures, and the name of the city from that day shall be, listen, the Lord is there. The name of the city will be forever. The Lord is there. The Lord is there. And that's what he's trying to do. Get rid of the harlot, get rid of the idolatry in our faith, in everything. Bring us closer to God. Bring us into the New Jerusalem. Why? Because the Lord is there. May he who makes peace in high places make peace for you. Until next time, God bless.